Thank you very much, Manish ji. Next, Sri Brijendra Singh ji.
Thank you, Chairperson, sir, for allowing me to speak under Rule 193 on the discussion on the situation in Ukraine. I'm also thankful to my party for affording me this opportunity to speak in the House on 2 consecutive days. It's a first for me. Sir, before I begin, let me put in a caveat that I'm neither an expert on international relations nor am I versed in the vocabulary of diplomacy. So what I say may be taken as musings of a concerned and partly informed citizen. So the current conflict in Ukraine is perhaps the most important geopolitical event since the pulling down of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, which marked the end of the Cold War. Why I say this is because this war in Ukraine has exposed the limitations of the world order as we've known for more than 7 decades. But does it indicate a move towards a new world order? Does it mark a dispersal of power among the big nation states? Does it mark the first signs of an emerging multipolar world? These and so many other questions are thrown up by this conflict. Because this conflict, as was rightly said, is a European conflict, but its ramifications can already be seen across the world. But when one thinks of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and more specifically Ukraine, because that's where the theater of war is, so what we hear constantly is Ukraine. What are the thoughts that instantly capture our mind? Or at least they have my mind. One, the students and the young people who were stuck there, mostly or almost all of them students of medicine who were there. And the numbers were more than 20,000. Second, it's the first full-scale war since the US invasion of Iraq, and it is being telecast live 24/7. Unfortunately, the Russian television has been blanked out in India, so we don't get to see it from their side. So what we get is the Western perspective, which is kind of fed to us on 24/7 basis. Third, India's independent foreign policy. There are questions being raised whether it is possible or justifiable to stay neutral, or as the word was used, consistent in such times. But that is what it has been. It's been an independent foreign policy. Fourthly, does this war also indicate that realpolitik does dictate and shape geopolitics, that each to his own? And lastly, the impact on economy. Everyone is concerned as to what will happen to the world economy, and not just economy of a region or a few countries, but the ramifications it will have across the world. Now, I'll try and build on these few points or these thoughts that I have summarized above. And let me begin with the issue of students and their evacuation. It's a very common phrase, all is well that ends well. Sir, you yourself raised concerns about why we were slow in the beginning, why were we not more proactive. All these things sound good in retrospect. But we are not talking about a normal situation. We are talking about a country which is engulfed in war. It is not as if the government did not issue advisories. And it is not that these advisories were issued as a matter of routine. These are exceptional advisories, which were issued in the month of January. Registration was opened up. More than 20,000 Indians registered with the Indian embassy in Kiev. But unfortunately, the situation was so fluid that no one knew for sure that war is actually going to happen. I remember I was in my constituency interacting with people, and two parents came to me. Their children were there in Kharkiv, And they said, MP साहब जरा बताइए कि आप हमारे बच्चों को वापस लाने के लिए क्या करेंगे? And it had so happened that that very day or the previous evening, the news going around on televisions was that the Russian forces are withdrawing. So that was the kind of confusion which prevailed, and resultantly, in spite of the advisory, only about 4,000 people had decided to come back to India before the war actually broke out on 24th of February 2022. So in retrospect, yes, one could argue this, but as I said, it was not a normal situation. It was not something which was known beforehand, but in spite of all that, the efforts which were put in, the efforts which were put in by the Prime Minister of our country, the efforts which were put in by the Ministry of External Affairs in coordinating with not just Ukraine and Russia, but the neighboring countries of Ukraine, which included Poland, which included Hungary, it included Slovakia, Moldova, Romania, because these were the exit points. In the sense, people had to move from Ukraine to these countries to get out of there. And it was a Herculean task. Our consulates had to be strengthened. Almost, as was stated in the External Affairs Minister's suo motu statement, some staff of additional 57 people, embassy staff had to be deployed there to assist in this evacuation. So all efforts were made. And let us not forget, especially the eastern side of Ukraine, where a serious war was raging at the time, where you have these places which we've been hearing of since day one, which is Kharkiv and then subsequently Sumy. This is where the actual fighting was happening. So to expect that people could be just moved in and they would help evacuate, it doesn't happen that way. And it is here that the role of the Prime Minister comes into the picture, because he's the one who interacted with the presidents of both Ukraine and Russia. And I'm not saying because of that there was a cessation in warfare, but at least a window was provided so that a corridor could be created and students could be moved out of that place. 3 lakh people, 3 million people were at the borders at that time. 3 million people, 30 lakh approximately, who were kind of all homeless and on their way to move out of Ukraine into the neighboring countries. So to expect a very easy way out is to expect the moon. But in spite of all that, 22,500 people have been evacuated, most of them students, without a single casualty. Nothing could be greater in terms of success than that. But I have to say, they are our children, so it was our bounden duty to get them home. And we have got them home. So let us not kind of put question marks on that. But yes, I do have a request. And sir, as you yourself mentioned, that these students, their futures hang in balance now. The chances of their going back to Ukraine and completing their education perhaps will not happen. So some via media will have to be worked out by Government of India, either in consultation with Ukraine or with other countries, or within our own medical system, as to ensure that these students do complete their education in some form or the other, so that that purpose is at least taken care of. Sir, I have to take this opportunity to thank once again, all those who were mentioned in the External Affairs Minister's suo motu statement. And this House owes a debt of gratitude towards all those who were involved in Operation Ganga. And these include our Prime Minister, our External Affairs Minister, and the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Civil Aviation, NDRF, Air Force, private airlines. In fact, private airlines, out of the 90 flights which came out of the war zone or the neighboring countries, out of 90, 76 were private airlines and 14 were Indian Air Force. The embassy personnel who worked under the most adverse circumstances. Then our union ministers who acted as special envoys at the behest of our Prime Minister, Shri Jyotiraditya Scindia ji, Shri Hardeep Puri ji, Shri Kiran Rijiju ji, and General V.K. Singh, who were deployed at Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland. And they facilitated and oversaw the evacuation process in these places. And I, for one, did not expect from my esteemed colleague to pick on certain snippets from social media which had gone viral and make it some kind of an issue on the floor of the House. But that's their nature. One can't help with that. So, and also, we owe a debt of gratitude to the countries who have cooperated with us in this regard, which includes both Russia and Ukraine. I mean, whatever people might say about our stand on the war which is going on, Ukraine has been very forthcoming in providing all the assistance in helping us evacuate our people from Ukraine. And also Poland, Moldova, Hungary, Romania. So all these countries we are thankful to. So secondly, the point which I raised, that it is perhaps the first full-scale war since the invasion of Iraq. And again, like the Iraq war, this is not a war between equals. But my esteemed colleague Manish Tiwari ji did bring out what could have led to this, and one can have a view on that. I would just mention two things here. In fact, two scholars. One is actually a journalist called Tim Marshall. Tim Marshall wrote a book some time back called The Prisoners of Geography. And he says that there are certain geographical issues which you can't escape. Howsoever new or old a country might be, there are certain facts of geography you cannot escape. And according to him, Poland and Ukraine are the two red lines which Russia will never allow anyone to cross. Russia today is a country with only 1.6 billion GDP. But these things go beyond just the economic strength. They are existential in nature to a country, to a nation state. And in this case, Ukraine more than anything else, Russia will fight to the last man was known to everyone. They conquered or captured Crimea in 2014. That was part of this only. 2015, University of Chicago, John Mearsheimer. It's a 45-minute lecture. He brings it out quite clearly that the way NATO is going about doing things and the way it's expanding its boundaries more and more towards the doorsteps of Russia, and the way they are trying to incorporate Ukraine into the NATO system, there are going to be consequences. And consequences, he was very specific in saying, are going to be totally to the disadvantage of Ukraine. It is Ukraine which is going to be destroyed. Neither the NATO countries will suffer for it, nor anyone else. If you look back today and hear it, it sounds almost prophetic, because whatever he said seems to be playing out as if to a copybook. But that's how it's happened. So it's a full-scale war that we are witness to. And as they say that you can start the war, but how it will end, no one can predict. And same thing seems to be happening here also. It's more than 40 days, and a resolution still does not seem to be in sight. Now we come to something which is very, very relevant to us, which we all think strongly about and have our views on it, which is our foreign policy. The External Affairs Minister in his statement used the word steadfast and consistent. I would just refer to these 5 statements of our permanent mission at the UN. All these statements are consistent about one thing: immediate de-escalation of tension, diplomacy and dialogue, and sincere and sustained diplomatic efforts to ensure that concerns of all sides are resolved through constructive dialogue. This is the thread which runs through all these statements. So we have been steadfast about it, we have been consistent, but I'm also reminded, I think it was G.B. Shaw, when someone asked him that, why aren't you ever consistent in what you say or what you believe in? He's supposed to have said, consistency is a characteristic of the asses and I'm not an ass. So India is consistent in its stand today, but what is there in store for us in future? Our foreign policy is that way. It's in very good hands, it's in very strong hands, and I'm sure as times unfold, that will be taken care of. Sir, now, when we talk about international relations and India's international policy, there is a whole gamut, and I can't go into the details of it. I'll just pick on 2-3 points. India-Russia relations. Relations which are termed a friendship. India-Russia friendship. Our friend mentioned about as to why India isn't taking a principled stand and so on and so forth. I just have to mention the Hungarian invasion. The Hungarian invasion in 1956. The Prague Spring of 1978, the Afghan invasion of 1979, India's stand then also was what it is today. So let us not fool ourselves into believing that there was something else happening earlier and something which is kind of unethical which is happening today. Lastly, sir, there's this great thing about Quad, that, maybe India's standing is now affected because, our stand might be taken otherwise. Japan has been here, we've had a summit. A $40 billion agreement of investment has been agreed to over the next 5 years. There's been a summit meeting with Australia also, and there has been no bad blood. There has been nothing of concern in these meetings, which just goes to show that Quad is in place. The United States of America, the most powerful player in the picture, has accepted, maybe kind of conditionally, but they accept our stance and our compulsions, and so we are well placed in that situation. There is the issue of sanctions. The katsa is being hung over us as some kind of a sword, but still we've gone ahead and made the purchase of S-400 systems. So it is not as if it is just us who are getting affected. Everyone is getting affected. Everyone is recalibrating its standing and recalibrating its friendships across the world and relations across the world. Lastly, sir, last point, sir. Impact on the economy is going to be on us. It is going to be worldwide. We've experienced this in 1973, the first oil shock, 1979, the second oil shock. So definitely there are going to be consequences. Sir, External Affairs Minister in one of his interviews had said, India tilts on its own side. May I conclude by saying we are too big to be tilting on anyone else's shoulder. Our weight is too much to bear. We have to carry our own weight, and we shall do so with aplomb and ease of an ancient civilization and a formidable nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Dr. T. Sumadiji.